The Seahawks and 49ers will rekindle their rivalry at Lumen Field on Thursday Night Football. Who's got the edge? We're going to be breaking it all down in our latest crossover Thursday edition here on the Locked On Podcast Network.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Glad to be teaming up with Eric Crocker of the Locked On 49ers podcast for our latest Locked On crossover Thursday special. Two bitter rivals rekindling their rivalry at Lumen Field, and both coming off of tough losses last week in Week 5. Croc, it does feel like this is a game where both these teams, even though it's only Week 6, it does feel like this truly is in that must-win territory for both these teams at the top of the NFC West.
It definitely is, and for different reasons. You know, I heard Nick Bosa say, technically, because there's a lot of games left, it's not a must-win, and it's not like you're eliminated from playoff contention if you lose this game. But with everything that's really on the line for the 49ers, you know, losing a third straight game to a divisional opponent, really starting off like really bad, especially for the 49ers standards, you know, 2-3. And the 2 wins, we talked about it before, hit and record. You beat the Jets, who just fired their head coach. You beat the New England Patriots, who look like they should fire everybody. So they don't have any good wins, and you had 2 bad losses on games where you were leading in the fourth quarter by double digits and found ways to lose those games, as well as get dominated by the Minnesota Vikings. And if it weren't for the great play of Fred Warner, who forced a fumble in the red zone, really on the 1-yard line, and got an interception in the red zone, that game really could have been a blowout. So 49ers not playing great. They definitely need that get back on track game. I'm not sure it's going to be the Seattle Seahawks, but yeah, we're interested to see what happens.
I want to ask you straight up, what has gone wrong so far? Because look, the 49ers, we know the injuries. Both these teams are dealing with a lot of injuries right now, but there's still a lot of talent on both sides of the football. Do you view this as a situation where the injuries have really played into this, or some of the departures in the offseason? They did lose some really good players in the offseason. That's the price you have to pay when you've eventually got to pay Brock Purdy, and you have a number of other players you got to pay. But what has really been the big storyline in regard to why this team is 2-3 coming into this primetime game?
You know, anytime I think you lose a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who's down with really 2 bad Achilles injuries right now. We thought it was just 1 bad Achilles. It turns out it's 2, and he's doing everything possible to, you know, so that he can play soon. And we'll see when he actually gets on the field. I think they opened up his window for return right now, but not having him and how important he is to this team in the red zone, having to play, you know, a game or so without Deebo Samuel and some of the other guys that have been hurt. I definitely don't think that helps, but the 49ers have a plethora of weapons. They have guys that play well, and even some of the reserve guys like, you know, Jordan Mason, who is playing in place of Christian McCaffrey. He's playing well. He's one of the top rushers in the NFL right now. I want to say he's only second to Derrick Henry. Last I checked, he may be near the top now, close, but definitely like in the top 3. So he's running the ball well. He hasn't caught a ton of passes, but he's caught the ball well out of the backfield. It feels like the 49ers receivers are kind of taking turn as to who's going to take over a game. Is it going to be Brandon Ayuk, the guy they paid a ton of money to? Is it going to be Juwan Jennings? He's had a very dominant game, especially against the Rams, going for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. Or is it going to be Deebo Samuel, who has led the 49ers in the receiving yards against the Minnesota Vikings? So they have a lot of guys. George Kittle as well. He's missed the game, banged up a little bit. But I don't think we can use those things as excuses, because in 2 of the games, the 49ers were dominating the games. The 49ers were up double digits against the LA Rams. Well, you squandered that opportunity with late turnovers, and the Rams go down and they win that game. You're terrible on special teams in the fourth quarter. That's not ideal. And then you're playing the Arizona Cardinals, another game, up double digits in the fourth quarter, and you end up fumbling late in the game. The defense, turns out they had trouble getting stops late in that game, and Kyler Murray makes a little magic, does a little something out of nothing, and all of a sudden you're losing 2 games where you feel like you should win. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's almost like the losses by the 49ers are more self-inflicted by just bad timing of certain issues as opposed to not having the guys to be able to win these games on the field.
Yeah, they've had so many injuries, but you mentioned the turnovers, and that feels to me like that is really the equalizer with this football team right now because they're still producing turnovers on the defensive side of the football. They have an even turnover margin, but they're near the top of the league in terms of turnovers. And I believe, if I'm correct, that they have 7 fumbles this year, and they've lost a handful of those. And then you get the 4 picks by Brock Purdy. So it has felt like this team coming in, like just something is off. The vibes just aren't quite where you would expect for a team that has so many players returning from the NFC champions last year.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you go back to the Super Bowl, right? Fumble in that game. And I think turnovers have been a big issue for the 49ers. How do you fix that? We could say, well, Jordan Mason, he fumbled the ball. It would be Christian McCaffrey. Well, I just talked about the Super Bowl. Christian McCaffrey fumbled early in the Super Bowl, so he's prone to turning the ball over. I can think of big games last year against the Dallas Cowboys where Christian McCaffrey fumbled inside the red zone. I can think of the Minnesota Vikings game going into the red zone where the Christian McCaffrey fumbled as well. So he's had his problems kind of holding on to the ball a little bit. We've seen Jordan Mason do that same thing. But ultimately, I don't know if it's rust. At first, I thought, teams aren't really playing a lot of guys in the preseason. Maybe they'll take the first quarter of the season to just kind of get back in that groove. But it looks like the 49ers, especially late in these games, are still trying to find that groove. I think they play extremely well for the first, few drives where they're scripted. And even if they get stopped on that first drive, they pick back up and they do a really good job of getting a lot of points in the first half. But last game, we saw the 49ers 0 points in the second half against the Arizona Cardinals. And partly because, well, you lost your kicker. You talked about injuries. You lost your kicker in that game. So they had to go for it one time on 4th and 18 because they felt like that was out of their punter, Mitch Wisnowski's range to be able to kick a field goal, even though he hit one early in that game. That was much closer, though. It's just been bad. Like it almost feels like the signs of a bad team. And I don't know if we're making excuses for them because we have higher expectations. And, oh, no, this can't be the 49ers. They're supposed to be great, right? And that's all they've shown us for the most part with Kyle Shanahan, especially with this team when they're loaded. But right now, there's something not quite right. And Super Bowl hangover, maybe. But I think they're looking for that game. I thought it was the Patriots to get them back on track. Maybe it's the Seahawks, and then all of a sudden they get their swagger back and they start feeling better about themselves and playing better for an entire four quarters.
I want to look at the defense real quick because the last couple of years, this has been a top 5 scoring defense, and they're not terrible right now. They're ranked 12th in the NFL, but you've got a new coordinator, and Seahawks fans are familiar with Nick Sorensen, who was on Seattle's staff for a long time, but you've got a new coordinator. You lose Javon Hargrave for the season. They still don't have Dre Greenlaw back. I mean, there are some major losses on that defense. Hufanga's out for at least 4 weeks. So when you look at the state of that defense, particularly with the fact that Seattle, even though they've been inconsistent, this is still a top 10 caliber scoring offense, and especially the passing game. Where is this defense at right now in terms of what you expected going into this season?
The 49ers throughout Kyle Shanahan's tenure have had a lot of turnover at the defensive coordinator position. And not because the coordinators have been bad and you've had to replace them. They've actually been the opposite. They've been very good. You have Robert Saleh. He goes to the New York Jets, takes a head coaching job there. D'Amico Ryans, he ends up coming in. All right, I can do a great job. He does a great job for the 49ers over the years he was there. And then you have Wilkes last year, who it wasn't to the standard of Ryans. And a lot of people dogged him. And I think Kyle Shanahan, some of the players, they weren't on the same page with him and whatnot. So they made him move from the booth onto the field. And some people are like, man, what's up with that? So it just wasn't a great, I think, mix between head coach and the defensive coordinator. So now they go with Nick Sorensen. And that's a guy that you've gotten in-house. He's been around the 49ers for a couple years now. Like you said, coming over from Seattle. And if you ask the fans, They want him fired right now. And now he's had some injuries, things he had to deal with, right? Like you would love to see Hufanga out there. You've had Travarius Ward, who's kind of nursing injuries here and there. I think there's some young guys that they're getting in the mix and they're trying to figure out a really good rotation for those guys. Just lost Gross Matos. He's going to be out for a while. That was a free agent signing. They were expecting to make a huge splash. You have Leonard Floyd. He's had a sack, but he hasn't made maybe as many splash plays working opposite of Nick Bosa as you would like. Fred Warner, he's been consistent guy, maybe the most consistent guy on the defense, maybe in the NFL at a position as far as dominance goes. But I think there's a lot of moving parts, and they're still trying to figure out how to get on the same page with Nick Sorensen and exactly how he wants things ran. So hopefully, throughout the first half of the season, they kind of figure that out. But that has been something where I'd say if you listen to the fans, they are very upset with how the season has started, specifically on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, I have found, especially on social media, that if you're listening to the fans on firing coaches, it would be like 2-week-long windows, because that's what fans tend to think. Like, there's fans wanting.
They loved him after week 1.
After the last 2 games.
Oh, week 1 they loved him after the Jets game, and then after everything else, it's been like, all right, yeah, fire him.
It's truly week to week when you're talking about social media with fans. But when we come back here on Crossover Thursday, we're going to switch gears, looking at some storylines for the Seahawks coming off of a really tough loss to the New York Giants at home, and how they may be trying to plan a rebound here against their rivals on Thursday Night Football. We'll get to that up next here on Crossover Thursday. This episode is brought your way by ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep, and enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedInNFL to learn more. Or get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedInNFL and use the code LockedInNFL at checkout for 15% off. This episode's also brought your way by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Bet at everything from George Kittle scoring a touchdown against the Seahawks, or Jackson Smith-Njigba being the first player in Thursday's game with a 30-plus yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com today and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be teaming up with division rival Eric Crocker of Locked On 49ers. We take a deep dive into this latest Thursday night installment. It feels like the Seahawks and 49ers play on Thursday night every single year, at least once. And the way the league is trending, maybe it'll happen twice in one of these seasons. But this crossover is brought your way by our friends over at Prize Picks. Make sure to download the app and use the code LOCKEDINNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Eric, we just broke down the 49ers, and it's been a disappointing start for them coming off of a Super Bowl run last year. 2-3. They are in third place, technically, in the NFC West, with the Cardinals having that tiebreaker with a 2-3 record. But as we were talking about before the show, this almost feels like we have two teams, even though the records are a little bit different, it feels like we are kind of in this same gray area. We're trying to figure out what this Seahawks team is going to be. They started off 3-0, albeit against inferior opponents. They had injury issues. They caught some lucky breaks, like Tua Tagovailoa not being available for the Dolphins. But they won the games they were supposed to win. up until this last weekend. And then the New York Giants, who ranked 30th in run defense, decided to run for 175, or they were in run offense, decided to run for 175 yards with Tyrone Tracy, the late round draft pick, as their running back. And some nightmares resurfaced from the last couple of years with this team with their run defense. And now the 49ers come to town. This is still an issue that Seahawk fans are really worried about, this run defense. Mike McDonald has not been able to be that overnight miracle worker. They've also had some injuries, though. And I guess the good news for Seahawk fans is that they are going to have hopefully a few of those guys back, including Boye Mafe, who is off to a really fast start. But they're not going to have Uchenna Nwosu and Byron Murphy II, which is going to still create plenty of concerns against the 49ers.
Shout out to Boye Mafe. Hopefully he heals up and they get him back. Really good kid out of University of Minnesota. When I look at the Seattle Seahawks and some of the games that they played, and you talked about these kind of back-to-back losses, it's so crazy how one play can really swing things. And we talked about that for the 49ers. A late fumble by Jordan Mason kind of changed the trajectory of that game and the outcome. When I look at the Seattle Seahawks and I'm watching them against the Detroit Lions, a fumble in the red zone by DK Metcalf, and how, he was dominant in that game. He played extremely well, but turning the ball over and giving, taking points off the board essentially, and then turning around and doing the same thing against the New York Giants. I think if there's anything, and again, you don't want to put a loss on one player, but if you want to talk about some plays that really impacted, I would say those two fumbles from DK Metcalf had just as big of an impact on those losses as anything else. Like that, those were huge in my opinion.
Yeah, they came at the worst. Not that there's ever a good time for a fumble, but the one against Detroit, they were driving deep into Lions territory with a chance to tie that game, and instead it gets returned. The fumble does all the way to the 14-yard line for the Seahawks, and it made it easy for Jared Goff and company to quickly make it 14-0. You had a 14-point swing, a 10-point swing minimum there with that. And then the one last week, again, another promising drive that turns into a fumble in the other team's territory, and then the Giants go down and get some points off of that. So Seattle has had issues with this the last couple of weeks where they've had untimely turnovers by Metcalf, but they've also had their issues on offense with the run game. And that, to me, that is the biggest storyline going into this game, really on both sides, is the run game. Because on offense, and Ryan Grubb, look, I loved it. It was refreshing yesterday talking to him at the facility. And he was saying, hey, this is all on me. Ken Walker III had 5 carries against the Giants. Like, that is inexcusable. A player of that talent getting just 5 carries, and he was healthy. It's not like he had an injury. He just didn't run the football. And as he said after the game, he said in the press conference yesterday that that's 100% on him. So I liked the fact that he was taking accountability for that, because it was a really questionable game plan against that really good Giants defensive line to just say, we're going to throw 85% of the time. They cannot do that against the San Francisco 49ers. And I know that they are missing some pieces. They lost Eric Armstead this offseason, Hargraves on injured reserve, but still, you got Nick Bosa, you got Leonard Floyd. You can't throw 85% of the time. They are going to have to get their run game going. And that really, to me, has been one of the issues in the last 4 matchups against the 49ers. They have not been able to get a consistent ground game to go with Geno Smith in this passing game. They have got to get Ken Walker III established in this contest.
I know we're going to talk about keys to victory, and I think that should be a big key to victory for the Seattle Seahawks, and not just having like early success with Kenneth Walker. We saw what happened in the Lions game. I mean, the run game for the Seahawks in that game was protrude. And then the second half, they said, you know what, we're going to stick with it. Maybe they're facing favorable numbers in the box that tells you, hey, you should run against this because they're just trying to defend the pass. But we saw it working for them and how that helped them get back in that game and how involved he was. And then you fast forward a week later and it's all back on Geno Smith. And Geno, he's interesting. He does a lot of things very well. Throws a pretty ball, deep ball. He can make plays with his legs, but it feels like there's something missing in the sense of just being able to play a little bit more winning football. But ultimately, he's a guy who you probably just don't want to put everything on his shoulders and throw 85% of the time. And you want to get the run game involved. So for the Seattle Seahawks, I would say don't go away from the run. Right? That was one thing that really helped the Arizona Cardinals against the Niners. They didn't run the ball necessarily well in the first half with James Conner, but they said, you know what? We're going to continue to run the rock. And not only did James Conner have a big game on the ground, but Kyler Murray did too. I mean, they each almost ran for 100 yards in that game, like both of them each. So if I'm the Seattle Seahawks, it's get Kenneth Walker the ball early and stick with it. Don't shy away from it, even if it's not working for you early on.
And Seattle, you look at their first 4 games, even the Lions game, Ken Walker III had 3 20-plus yard runs in the second half. Denver game, the season opener, almost all of his 100-plus yards happened in the second half. It just feels like that has been a chronic trend here. The first half, we're just going to sling the ball around. And, oh, wait, I forgot that I have number 9. And they started to give him the football, but they didn't do that on Sunday. So as Grubb said, if they would have given him 10 to 15 carries, I think you have a much different game on Sunday against New York. But they're going to need to do that in this one, and they're going to have to slow down Jordan Mason. And I know with the way their run defense has been the last couple of weeks that fans are really nervous about that with the way that Kyle Shanahan is able to get his run game going, scheme things up, create extra gaps. They're all things that are really going to impact the Seahawks in this game. And then, of course, the offensive line. You've been on this Locked On podcast with me a couple times, and it feels like this is a broken record, but the Seattle Seahawks offensive line, this is not a bombshell, but they have not been good. They have not done a good job protecting Geno Smith, and yet up until last Sunday, Geno Smith was not getting sacked very often because he's been masterful moving the pocket, maneuvering the pocket, getting the ball out quickly. Giants got to him 7 times. That is not going to cut it against San Francisco if they do not help the offensive line out. And I know from San Francisco's perspective, Nick Bosa and Leonard Floyd, they're probably licking their chops looking at the way this O-line played last week.
Even against Detroit, that was a game where the pocket was consistently collapsing on Geno. And I thought Geno was kind of a magician in the pocket, being able to step up, move, find some space, throw some darts to some guys in some tight windows. Can you do that week in and week out? And we saw against the New York Giants, you can't, getting sacked 7 times. And now you're going to play the 49ers. I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe Detroit's defensive line is just that great. Maybe the New York Giants defensive line is just that great. But if it's just a bad offensive line by the Seattle Seahawks, then going up against Nick Bosa and Leonard Floyd, I know there won't be Hargraves, he's out, but some of these guys in the interior for the 49ers, it can be a long day for Seattle and Geno Smith, and asking him not only to carry the load because you're struggling to run the ball, but also struggling because, hey, I don't have time to be able to, look and see who's open, go through my reads comfortably. That's just a lot to put on the quarterback week in and week out.
Especially when you're asking them to do it 88% of the time, like what they did on Sunday with dropbacks. When we come back, we've kind of already started to dive into this, but we're going to be looking at some keys to victory for the Seahawks and 49ers going into this latest NFC West matchup. What do they have to do to get a signature in-division win on Thursday Night Football? We'll get to that up next here on Crossover Thursday. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping a car payment when it comes to buying tickets for your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, and comedy near you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and with their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You want to see the Seahawks tomorrow night on Thursday Night Football at Lumen Field? You can still get seats in one of the loudest venues in the NFL for under $150. Great seats for an awesome primetime matchup between two bitter rivals. Game Time has deals on the tickets right on the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be teaming up with Eric Crocker of Locked On 49ers. We've got this massive NFC West rematch coming up on Thursday Night Football. And Both teams licking their wounds a little bit after losing games last week. The Seahawks just ahead of the 49ers in the NFC West. Seahawks 3-2, 49ers 2-3. Both teams viewing this as a must-win for different reasons. Croc, when we look at the 49ers going into this game, and in the last couple of years, it has been a dominant one-sided series. The 49ers have won 5 straight, including that wild card game in 2022. So it's been very lopsided, but this does feel like a game with both teams coming in the way they've been playing that maybe is a little more even than what it has been in recent years. When you look at San Francisco and what they have to do to get back on a winning track at Lumen Field, playing in front of a hostile road crowd, what do you see them having to do on offense and defense?
No, I think the key for the 49ers right away is, I think it's easy to go to win the turnover battle, so I won't go there. But I would say win in the red zone. The 49ers last week, 1 for 6 in the red zone. They weren't great early in the season. I think scoring a lot of points against the New York Jets, it masked how bad the 49ers were in the red zone. They kicked 6 field goals in that game. That's 18 points that's accounted for by the kicker, who, by the way, again, he's hurt with a high ankle sprain. So you have Matthew Wright, who will be taking over kicking duties for the 49ers. But let's be more efficient in the red zone. Let's win in the red zone. And I think that right there, some of these games that are going a different way late could be a lot different if the 49ers were just better early in the game in the red zone. So the 49ers, that's the first key to victory for them. Win the red zone.
Yeah, I look at from Seattle's perspective, situational football on defense. They have got to get off the field. The third downs, that was something early in the season they were doing really well with on defense. They were forcing a lot of punts and they were getting a lot of stops on third down. But last week, Daniel Jones and company, they converted almost 50% of their 16 third down opportunities. And they were especially efficient in the first 3 quarters of that game. And they were able to hold on to the ball for 25 minutes in the first half. And I think San Francisco, with how well they run the football, even with Jordan Mason instead of Christian McCaffrey, they're going to be wanting to do that as well. The Seahawks have got to find a way to be better on early downs, and they got to get off the field on third. No 3rd and 18 screens getting converted. That happened not once but twice this last game. They have got to get off the field first and foremost on the defensive side of the football. And on offense, you can't let Nick Bosa take over this game. So what's the biggest key? You got to have a run game. There's got to be a semblance of balance. And I'm not saying Ryan Grubb needs to run the ball 75% of the time in this game, but they have got to be able to at least get it to where San Francisco is going to respect the run game, because New York wasn't doing that on Sunday. Play action, we're not going to fall for that because you guys never run the football. They have got to get Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet established in this game. And if the first few runs don't work, so what? You cannot just decide, you know what, we're going to sling it 90% of the time. If you try to do that against this 49ers defense, they will run you out of your building. There has got to be a running game. And Ken Walker III is one of your best players. Get the football in his hands and let him go to work. That takes some pressure off Geno. It slows down the pass rush a little bit. And then Geno can get some of those shots that the 49ers have given up at times this year in the passing game.
I think another big one for the 49ers, and we talked about Hufanga being out, and this guy's kind of been banged up really a lot throughout his career, but definitely a lot to start the season. Started off on the PUP list, got activated, immediately was out after hurting his hand, and he's back on IR. You got some young dudes back there, Jair Brown, Mustafa, and when you're facing a guy like DK Metcalf, when you're facing a veteran like Tyler Lockett, when you're facing a very young, talented receiver like Jackson Smith and Jigma, you have to really limit the explosive plays. So I think that's the key for the 49ers. Limit the explosive plays from these guys who at different times kind of terrorize the 49ers vertically down the field. You got young guys out there. You can't have any blown assignments, and you can't miss tackles on these guys.
Yeah, both these teams are going to be having some young players that are going to be in. And I'm going to mention the pass rush real quick. The front four has got to be effective, speeding up Brock Purdy, because, look, you are probably going to be playing Nehemiah Pritchett, the rookie, the 5th rounder out of Auburn, instead of Reek Woolen. That is a huge loss in this game for Seattle. Or Artie Burns will be playing there off the practice squad, and he's more experienced, so that may make more sense for them. But either way, you're going to have a drop-off there at that other cornerback position. take pressure off those guys by making sure that you are winning up front. They've got to find a way to speed things up for Brock Purdy. If he's got time in the pocket with the injuries in the secondary now, some of the injuries they've got up front, that does not bode well for Seattle. So they got to find a way to get that pass rush going after they had their worst pass rushing game of the season against the New York Giants this last week. All right, it's time to go prediction time against the spread. We don't give score predictions until this week. It's my Wednesday show. We actually already had it. But looking at the spread here, the 49ers are 3.5-point favorites at Lumen Field. And Croc, you and I were talking about this before the show, that you admitted you were kind of surprised that the 49ers were viewed as favorites coming into this game.
I think you have to be a little, I don't want to say you have to be confused, but again, the 49ers, they haven't beat anybody. You beat the Patriots, you beat the Jets. Those aren't great teams. The teams you've lost to also aren't great teams. Those teams are losing games. So I don't see this formidable win to be able to hang your hat on and say, oh, this is why we should be favored. And then when you add in the fact that, one, you're playing on the road, two, you're traveling on a short week, which typically favors the home team. 49ers, 3.5-point favorites? That's pretty bold by Vegas.
Well, keeping that in mind, do you think the 49ers are able to cover that in this game?
If I were a betting man, which I actually am, I would take Seattle and the points. Now, that doesn't mean that the 49ers can't win. They can win by a field goal. At the end of the game, they kick a field goal, they win by 3. But if you take the plus 3.5 by Seattle, you still would win there.
Yeah, I'm actually on the other side of the coin here a little bit. The Seahawks are 3.5-point underdogs. I don't know if they can stay quite that close. They have not had a game against the 49ers in the last 2 years where they have finished with less than an 8-point deficit at the end. And that was a game that they scored late to make it look closer than it really was. Now, I don't think this 49ers team is the team that they've faced the last 2 years, but there's just enough question marks with Seattle's defense, particularly the run defense, that I'm hesitant to, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, but if I was, I'd be hesitant to say the Seahawks are going to find a way to cover that as an underdog, just because I have concerns with the run defense first and foremost, and being able to protect Geno Smith. I think this game can be close. I don't know if it's going to be close enough, though, to get inside 3.5 points. As always, a special thanks to all the Seahawks fans out there, 49ers fans as well. Thanks for tuning in to this latest Locked On Crossover Thursday special. Looking forward to a big game in prime time. And make sure you're listening to the Friday shows, Locked On Seahawks and Locked On 49ers. We break down the results from Thursday's primetime clash. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday and the game tonight. Go Hawks, go 49ers.